Hi there, my name is Eli, and I spent the last 25 years or so working with data. The first few years, 16 or 17 years of that, I worked in accounting, finance, and quality assurance. I pulled reports, created graphs. I've created thousands of graphs probably throughout my career. And over the past 6 or 7 years, I worked for a national healthcare company, and I've been part of the data analytics team and part of the legal compliance team, working with reports and working with data visualizations and dashboards. I've completed multiple courses on data analytics and data visualization and all the different aspects of data and particularly data visualizations. And I've read some very valuable resources, some of which I will be sharing with you so that you can benefit from learning some of the fundamentals of good data visualization, data design, and how to better communicate your message through visuals. Before we jump onto this chapter's material, let me share an anecdote with you. Not long ago, I was invited to attend a presentation by very important people, and this was not related to my work. I went just as a guest with somebody else, but there were multiple people sitting in the audience, and the presenters were showing, each presenter was showing different graphs and different visuals. And the one thing that it had in common is that it was very confusing to read. There were many graphs that just couldn't be made sense of, and the presenters had to spend a lot of time explaining what they were trying to communicate with the visual. Visuals should give the message for you. You should not be explaining the visual, but the visual should be explaining the message that you're trying to convey. So it's important to understand some of the fundamentals of data visualization design. In this chapter, we will be covering white space and eye tracking. Those two concepts are fundamental for us to better communicate the message. In future chapters, we will be covering a lot more. Stay with me. Let's jump over to my computer. Let's get some hands-on experience on how to better communicate by using white space and eye tracking. All right, let's get started. Before we jump straight into the data though, let me make a quick disclaimer. All the data that I will be using is either fake data that I've created and put together just for the purpose of illustrating the point that I'm making across, or has been downloaded off of a publicly available data set from sites such as Kaggle that are repositories that contain data for things like this, for illustration and for teaching. No data is or should be linked to any actual living person because it's all just created for this purpose. Now, having said that, I don't know if you've ever heard, but it is said that goldfish have a longer attention span than human beings. It is said that a goldfish can focus on something for about 12 seconds, whereas the human can only focus on it for 6 to 8 seconds before we get distracted. When you create a graph or a visual and you're trying to communicate a message, you only have a very, very short span of time between you showing that and people understanding the message that you're trying to convey. Now, if I showed you, well, let's say I'm in a large group in a big presentation with a large audience, and I showed this picture of a mouse mat, and I asked the audience, where do your eyes go when you see this image? I have a sense that for a good group, their eyes go straight here, just like mine. Mine went straight here because we have two red cars that are together, and because it's somewhat in the center. But here's another red car, and red tends to grab our eyes. But for some people, maybe this is what is going to catch their attention because it's a small car, is yellow, which is also an attractive color. Some people might identify with this. It's an SUV, and maybe they drive an SUV. But in general, if I took a survey, I think most people will have a different opinion, and I wouldn't have a very consistent idea of what I tried to have the audience focus in. Now, what if I showed this to the audience instead? If I showed this to the audience, I think their eyes, for most of them, will immediately go, no, not there, here. So I think most people will focus on this car, right? Why? Because obviously it's red. It's the only red car here, and it's highlighted. When we show a large amount of data, we want to make sure that we are actually giving our viewer something to focus on. If our message is to look at this red car, then we want to give them that highlighted in a way that they know what you're drawing them into. Having said that, let me make one point here that is very important. Every graph that you create should be to communicate a specific particular message. You don't create a graph that contains data about your entire data set or data that is just scattered all over and it doesn't tell anything, because the point of a visual is to give a specific message. If you have multiple messages, you break that down into multiple graphs. So having said that, if we pull data out of Excel of one of these publicly available data sets and we create a graph with the default settings, and let's say I pick the 3D column graph, this is what it will generate. I see several problems with this graph. See, the first one, and what we're focused on right now, is white space. Our brains work by organizing or understanding data that is organized much better and much more quickly than data that is disorganized. When we look at this graph, we see white space here, white space here, white space here, a good amount of white space here. We see that our graph is shifted to the side of the slide, and we really don't know why Excel didn't add any space here. But this creates a disorganization in our brains that makes our effort to try to understand a lot bigger. We have to spend more time looking at this in order to process it because of all the wasted white space around it. Common sense will say, well, just move this legend to the top and then this will widen and you'll cover your data better. But we also have other issues, and in future videos we'll cover those, like the choosing the right graph. But in this case, for example, immediately we can see that we only have, Excel only shows us 2 categories where we have 4 categories right here. We can see that in the legend. We also see that the categories with lower values are hidden behind these columns with a lot more values. This is impossible to read. Sure, you can turn this, rotate this graph in Excel and be able to see the data, but let me just make this clear, even though this chapter is not focused on that, never use 3D graphs, never. They're just not good and they don't serve a good purpose. Also, if I look at this right here, I can see that this axis shows age, 18 to 25 to 30 to 35, and then 24, 29, 34. Sure, you might say, well, it's just silly because, you know, it's common sense that this is split like this. But sure, it is split like that, but it takes an extra fraction of a second for us to understand that this is organized that way because our brains are used to reading left to right. In general, we can see many issues with this data. Now, let's say I choose, because you might say, well, you chose the wrong type of the wrong type of graph. You picked a 3D graph, which is really not going to work for this case. Well, let's pick the standard, probably the most commonly used graph, which is the column graph, the vertical column graph. Now we chose a different graph, and the only thing that I added to this graph was these labels. Everything else is what Excel picked by default. And now we can see the same problem. White space issues here. This is unbalanced and is confusing. It takes our brain extra processing power to understand this data. In addition to the white space issue here, we see that the labels here will overlap. And also we see that there's a gap here. And this gap is really not that good because it emphasizes all this space over our data, which is the columns. So our columns need to be this narrow because we have the extra columns here. So what do we do about that? Well, let's work on a solution. If I show you this data right here, do you get the message or the idea that it's trying to present to you? Now, just so you know, this graph is the same data that is used in this graph. It's the exact same data. Now, when I open this graph, I can see some things that are helpful to me. The first one is I have a title. Now, my title tells me immediately what we're looking at. My title says younger people are using e-cigarettes daily in greater numbers. Well, my eyes are immediately drawn to this section right here because I have a color section. Everything else here is gray. So I can assume, my brain can assume immediately that when I'm talking about this, I'm referring to this. I'm referring to the color section. I have a legend that is helpful because this legend tells me that this is the category, the use them everyday category. And then my vertical axis is clear. It shows me age brackets that are easy to read left to right. I don't have to think of whether this should be read one way or the other. So why is this graph effective? Well, all of those things together help me see this graph, and it takes me honestly about 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds to understand. The fact that we have labels here in percentages, it shows me that this percentage is the percentage of people ages 18 to 24 that are using e-cigarettes more than anybody else. I don't need to spend more time in this graph. So all this is good, but let's look at the actual example. We'll delete this right here and we'll recreate it so that you can work with this together with me. So this is the data set, and it's a data set that is publicly available on Kaggle. This data set consists of 237,630 rows of data. It's a very big data set. Now, if our task is to show people the proportion of people or younger people that are using e-cigarettes, well, we'll have to find a column here that shows us the age category, which is this one. We found it. And then we'll find the other column, the column that will show us e-cigarette usage. Now we see that there's a column here, e-cigarette usage, with different values. So the quickest and easiest way for us to create this graph is to first create a pivot table that will pull just the data that we need. We'll create that in a new worksheet. Click OK, and now we have this pivot table here. Now, again, we'll just pick age category, and our age category will go into our rows. Now we have rows for each different category. So obviously, if we want to create a graph, we want to have rows and we want to have columns. We want to have a matrix. The other value that we care about is the e-cigarette usage. So we'll grab that and place it in the columns. Now we have a matrix. Now our matrix values show never used e-cigarettes in my entire life, not at all right now, use them every day, or use them some days. To me, this is not very logical because use them some days is a progression from not at all right now, and then use them every day will be like the next step. So we're going to grab that and drag it to the end. Now we have a natural progression. Never use them, not right now, use them some days, and then ultimately use them every day. We have an increasing progression. Now, how do we get the values here? Well, we know that we have, we look at our data, unique patient IDs for all the 230 some thousand rows, 237,630. So we can grab the patient ID and place it in the values. Now, automatically Excel will add those values up. It will add the patient ID. We don't care about the sum. What we want is a count. So we'll go into the value settings, value field settings, and we'll select a count. When we click OK, now we can see that we have a count of each category for each row that we selected. If I select these 4 categories, my total is 12,777, which is the same as the grand total here. Now we can create a graph from this data. So we'll select the data. We don't want the grand total in the graph, but we'll select the data and we'll click insert, and we can look at the recommended charts. The first recommended chart is obviously the column chart that we've used before. If I make this bigger, we see all the same problems that we've already mentioned. We see the access problems, the white space problems, the gaps, the bar width, and all these problems. So let's pick a different category or a different graph instead. In a future episode, we will talk about which graph is better for the different type of data that we're presenting. And don't miss it because it's going to be really good. You're going to learn some things about which graphs are useful and which graphs are not useful and which ones you should avoid. But to stay on topic, let's change the chart type. The first one that I will pick, because I have long label names here, will be the horizontal bar chart. Now that I picked this horizontal bar chart, I have to fix some of the problems that I already mentioned. Let's move this legend to the top. We right click on it and move it to the top. Okay, now this is looking a little bit more helpful. We have the legend at the top. Now we have this reaching out, to the entire width or almost the entire width of our graph area. So let's hide some of these fields or all of them because we don't need them. And now we have a more balanced graph. Now the problem we still have is that these bars are too narrow and we have this white space that it just breaks the flow of data. So let's pick a different chart type instead. If we choose the stack bar chart, now we have the bars stacked up in values, and these bars are actually showing us. These are really helpful if we want to show the quantity of people, like a total of the people that are, in this case, using e-cigarettes daily. Now, because we're looking at the actual size, this would be the total, the entire length of this bar will be the total of the people that are in this age bracket. Now we have many more people that are in this age bracket, and that's why this bar is bigger. But we're not looking at comparing the totals to the totals. We're looking at just this category, and we want to see, or we want to emphasize that proportionally this group is using e-cigarettes more than other age groups. So the first thing that we need to address before we go there is, if you look at this graph, it's sorted in kind of an inverted order. The age 80 or older are at the top, and then the younger people are at the bottom. Excel does that when you create a graph out of a pivot chart. So in order to fix that, you will want to go here and sort it invertedly. And now we have the age categories in a more logical sequence. Now, again, going back to how we want to display this information, while this is useful, it's not really the message that we're trying to communicate. So let's actually change this graph type and select a 100% stock bar. Why did I pick a 100% stock bar? Because what I care is, again, I care about the proportion. I care about how many of the young people are actually using e-cigarettes every day. So not necessarily the number. Now, when you have 100% stack graphs, either columns or horizontal bars, you don't want to use quantities because you're actually selecting to use something that is displaying a 100%. So what you want to use is percentages. If you have a pie chart, you're choosing a visual that shows you percentages. So normally you want to choose this data to be shown as percentages. Now the problem we have is these labels are quantities. So let's go to our data and fix that. We can select our data, right click on it, and go to the value field settings. When we look at the value field settings, we can see show values as. Right now there's no calculation being applied. What we really care is we want to know what percentage of people in this category are never using e-cigarettes compared to the entire row, right? We want to know what percentage of people 80 years or older have never used e-cigarettes the entire life. So what we want to select here is the percentage of row total. Now when we click OK, we see that people 80 years or older, 88.85% of them never use e-cigarettes. And if we select across, we can see that this row adds up to 100%. So that's how we know that we're selecting the percentage per row. Now that we change that, we see our data here showing percentages, which is the right metric to show in a 100% stack bar chart. So now we have another issue here. This is not very clear. We have multiple categories and we don't really know what we're trying to say. So let's start by adding a chart title. And our chart title should say younger people are using e more than older people. So our title is very specific. We're telling our viewer that younger people are using e-cigarettes more than older people. Now we can click on the legend and make it bigger so that it's easy to see. But now let's go back to the fact that we have multiple categories with different colors. If we're trying to say the younger people are using e-cigarettes more than older people, then we don't really care about these other types of usage. We want to focus on those that are using them every day. In fact, we can change this e-cigarettes, this title to say daily more than older people. Now we need to select a color pattern that highlights the message we're trying to send. If I choose this gray one, it's a good one, but I'm actually going to choose this gray one right here. So now there's nothing highlighted, but remember the example we used with the mouse mat. So let's select this one. And because this is a negative topic that we're talking about, use of e-cigarettes, we want to choose a color that is actually a warning. We can use orange, we can use red. Truly, you don't want to use the brightest reds or the brightest oranges that you can. And the next video in this series will touch on color, but you do want to use some color that shows a warning or something that immediately makes us think of something not positive. Now, there's also another rule in data visualization design, and is to limit the amount of ink that you're using. So you don't need to make anything bold other than what you're trying to communicate. Sometimes it's helpful and it's good to make your title bold, especially if you have subtitle. But in this case, we just want to focus on our label. Our label here needs to be bold because it's not very clear. We're going to make it bigger. And then let's probably pick 12. And then we also want to make sure that our labels here, when we choose the color, we don't choose the darkest black or the whitest white. We want to choose one or two shades lower or higher than those colors. So I'll choose just one shade here. It'll make it clear to see. Now we're done with this graph in terms of the message that we're trying to communicate it. But remember, we're focusing on, and now this is the eye tracking part. Why is this the eye tracking part? Because if we remember, we're making sure that we have a highlighted column that contains the data. We have a legend that is very clear that draws people, viewers' eyes to that. And we have a title that is clear. Now, if we want to make this better, now we need to focus on white space. The main issue that I see right now is that this white space in between the bars is broken. And this draws my brain to think of these bars as segments. We already have a segmented data bar, so we don't need this. Let's just click on it and remove them. Now the other issue is that the white gaps between our data are too big. They're bigger than our bars, and as I said, white space should be pauses in your speech. So you should have gaps that are at least equal or smaller than your bars. So let's lower the gap width. The default here was 219. I will choose between 50 and 75. Let's go 65. In this example, I think 65 is good. It gives us a pause between data that is a little bit smaller. Let's actually go with 70. And it's smaller than our bars, and it allows us to see and understand the data, and that this is just a gap. Actually, let's see what happens if we do 50. There. Now our visualization shows pauses in the data, but not pauses that are bigger than our actual message. Now the next thing to do is to give it some padding so that our data is not so close to the edges. We'll move this legend down a little bit, and then we'll move our title down a little bit so that we have some padding all around it. And then one last thing, this axis right here is giving us information that we don't need. In data visualization design, clutter is the enemy. You want to remove as much information that is irrelevant as possible. So let's just delete that. In that sense, let's now even the white space around it. And we don't need that because this is what we're focusing on, and we have that data right here. Now you have a graph that if you show to your viewers, it will allow them to understand your message within the first 3 or 4 seconds. And the presenter is not going to have to spend a lot of time explaining this message. Now that we understand this message, let me show you an actual real life example that I pulled off of the internet. This graph works because it tells us right away more young Americans. So it's telling us what we should be focusing on. And so when you look at the categories here, the creator of this graph made 3 simple categories and then highlighted in red the category that we need to focus on, younger Americans. Now you tie this to this category. It's very easy. We can see it very quickly. The other item on this that I want to highlight is the fact that each one of these dots is a data value in this data set. So it's a very big data set. If the presenter had not colored this, we would have an impossible time trying to understand which data corresponded to each age bracket. Now, he also added the line because this is a scatter plot that would show dots for each value. But he added this line, which is an average of all those points. And that line draws our eye into the line that we need to follow. Another thing that he did correctly was make the other data points gray. That tells us that this data is irrelevant to the message that he was trying to show, or he or she was trying to show, David. So here. So the amount of data is very large, but the message is immediately understood. In summary, your job as a communicator is to make sure you're choosing the right visualization for the message that you're presenting, to show what the real message is, and to draw the eyes of the viewer to what truly matters. Make sure that they're looking at what you want them to look. You can make that and you can make your point more effectively by using white space. Remember, the brain reads organized data much better if it's even and if it has good padding and good spacing in between. So did you learn anything? I hope you learned something about white space and eye tracking, and I hope you start practicing these tools so that you can better communicate your message in every visual. In the next chapter, we'll be covering some color theory, some color concepts such as hue, saturation, and how to use color to better communicate your message. It is a very exciting topic, and I hope you join me in the next episode. I'll see you then.